Okay. Oh, you're going to get all the slides. So I'm going to go through soil care, and then we're going to take a break. Sound good? And by the way, that clock is about 10 minutes behind. So we're at almost 10 right now. Okay? Let's go on to soil care. So it used to be that we thought about two things. We thought about fertilizing the plant. We don't think about that anymore. Now we think about the soil. We know that the plant and the soil work together. If you feed the soil, you're feeding the plant. The other thing is, when I was a baby gardener, I knew that there was pH, there was nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. That's all the plants needed. Well, there's all kinds of micronutrients too, but plants also have a relationship with the biology, the fungi, the worms, the mycorrhiza that are in the soil. So they're all working together, talking together, okay? So again, if we feed the soil, the plant is going to be just fine. So soil care really has taken a huge change, okay? We know we're losing a lot of, this is natural capital. Our topsoil is capital. It's something very important for us as a nation. We're losing a lot of that topsoil. So we have no topsoil and we have lifeless soil. Benefits of healthy soil really supports plant growth. If you have compost and microorganisms in your soil, you're going to be holding much, much more water in your soil. Your soil becomes a reservoir for water, okay? So having healthy soil really means that you won't have to water as often, right? Healthy soil also cleans water. The microorganisms in soil know how to break down hydrocarbons. So if you'll see a lot of times, you probably are familiar with this, that parking lots are now often graded so that they slope towards an area that's kind of a bioretention or a water holding area that has lots of plants and things in it. We do that because we know that our cars are maybe leaking a little oil, there's a little gas, or they've picked up something on their tires, and when it rains, we don't want that, we want that water going into our underground aquifer, right? We have a big underground aquifer here in Santa Clara County, but we want that water to go in and be clean. So if we can send it to a planted area where there's lots of microorganisms, they will break down those hydrocarbons and clean it before it gets to our aquifer. If those hydrocarbons go out to, say, the bay or a river, that marine life doesn't know how to break them down, okay? So it's much better to get it into our soil. Soil is amazing, has amazing properties. This is a site that was in San Jose. It's what we call an infill site, which means they took out maybe a big house and a property and put in a lot of condos and things. Usually when they do that, they scrape all the topsoil off. I don't know, sell it maybe to somebody, I don't know. But you have a very lifeless soil as a result. They don't usually put the compost, the topsoil back, is what I'm saying. So topsoil is very valuable. So what you see here, this was in the middle of winter. This was probably 5-6 years ago. Middle of winter, it had rained, and there were no weeds. Uh-oh. That's not good. Okay. There was a lot of puddles. The water wasn't soaking in. There was no weeds, so there was no plant life. This was really sterile soil in their back. So what we know now is there's a whole soil food web. There's bacteria, there's fungi, there's earthworms, there's all kinds of stuff going on. And again, if we take care of that, and the way that we take care of that is we don't use petroleum-based fertilizers, okay? Most of our fertilizers come from oil, right? It's kind of a, we use oil to create these fertilizers. But if we go more towards using compost, mulching the soil, doing some natural things, that's all going to be really good for those microorganisms. Earthworms are very sensitive to those chemical fertilizers. If you have earthworms in your soil, you're good. You're good. And the best way to get earthworms in your soil is to compost with leaves. That is their absolutely favorite food. And I can guarantee if you had leaf litter, say, from a sycamore, and you ground it up and you put it over a bed, by spring, you would have so many worms in there, you wouldn't believe it. They love leaves. Yes, ma'am?
I use organic fertilizer, but
Yeah.
I take my compost, which is full of worms,
Yeah.
throw it in the hole with some organic fertilizer. Is that hurting the worms, or should I not use it?
The question is if she's using organic fertilizer with her own compost and putting it in the hole. What are you planting?
Not drought-tolerant plants.
Okay. So if it's something that needed some extra fertilizer, I think that would be fine as long as it's an organic, slow-release fertilizer. Yeah, yeah. And then observe, see what if you still have worms. Okay. There are some really good books. I think I'm going to be talking about those. On the soil biology, there's a really good book. I'll tell you later. Okay. There's nitrogen cycling that goes on. Plants need nitrogen. We know that pea plants, do you know this? Pea plants have the ability, they have little nodules on their roots that have bacteria in them, and the bacteria change nitrogen from the air into nitrogen that the plants can use. So there's just all kinds of fun stuff going on in the garden. This was a little study that showed sterile soil versus soil with bacteria versus soil with bacteria and nematodes. So what this is showing is you're getting better and better plant growth based on the diversity of life in your soil. Okay? All right. So, and you can also eliminate a lot of waste by using that for your soil. So I try to get contractors, if we're taking out plants, to kind of chip that debris and keep it on site, and then we use that as mulch for the garden. I have done that with my own garden. I told you I have somebody come out and prune. I have a big hedge. I have them come out and prune that. If I need wood chips, I ask them to chip that and leave it on site. So sometimes I ask them to come with an empty truck, so I know that it's all from my house, and I have them chip it and leave it. You can also create your own mulch with either an electric chipper or a leaf shredder. If you have grass, yes, sir.
Sorry, just
Sorry.
can you chip anything? So, for example, I have a lot of ivy. So if I cut the ivy down, I've been told if I chip the ivy, then the ivy will just grow back.
It will, yeah. Yeah, ivy, so he asked, can I chip the ivy? I would say, especially if it's that Algerian ivy, it's got really big leaves and it just grows all over and can have a really thick trunk. I would not use that. However, I say that, but if you really let it dry out, like if you chipped it and then, it's hard to have room to kind of spread it, but if you could spread it and let it really dry out, then it won't have a chance of resprouting. But you do run the risk with ivy. It resprouts very easily. Okay, so there are a few invasive things that I would not keep in there. If you have grass and you want to keep grass cycling is really important. So instead of bagging it, get a mulching mower. Grass typically needs like 4 pounds of nitrogen a year. A pound of that can come from grass. This is a leaf shredder that I use. Basically when I have a lot of oak leaves and laurel and magnolia, and so it just sucks them up and shreds them and puts them in a bag. And I use that for my compost and also for mulching. There's also some hoppers. I don't think I have that picture of the hopper. There's some hoppers. You can put leaves into like a leaf shredding hopper that sits on top of your trash can. and you put the leaves in and it kind of chips it up and shreds them. Compost. We're almost done with soil care, but I want to tell you how to compost because I think everybody should be composting. And I've done it wrong for many, many years, so I can tell you, I think, some good ways to do it. Composting can attract rodents. You have to be very careful about that. So what I like to do is I like to have an open pile, and the open pile has nothing in it that would attract any kind of rodents. And what I like to do is to use shredded leaves and coffee grounds from a coffee shop, like Pete's or Starbucks. If you ask them, many of them will save coffee grounds for you, or they just have a big bag of them. And you mix the shredded leaves, 1 part shredded leaves by volume. Sorry, I'm thinking. I'm thinking. Volume, yeah, 4 parts shredded leaves by volume and 1 part coffee grounds. The coffee grounds have a lot of nitrogen, so we know that composting is brown and green. The green is the nitrogen, the brown is the carbon. Leaves are all carbon, so if you can shred those leaves and then add some coffee grounds, you've got a perfect combination of green and brown, and it won't attract any critters. You can turn it, it's very easy to turn with like a pitchfork because there's nothing big in it. It's just those leaves and the coffee grounds. And during the summertime, you are going to have to water it in order to keep it good, or you just do all of this in the fall, right before it's starting to rain. Fall is when we get all of our leaf drop, so it's a great time to start a compost bin. And then it'll kind of work down all winter. Yes, ma'am?
Instead of coffee grounds, can we use scraps from the kitchen?
Okay, instead of coffee grounds, can we use scraps from the kitchen? Yes, however, that will attract rodents, and so I do that in a closed bin. So what you see here is open bin, shredded leaves, and used coffee grounds. Here in a closed bin with a top on it, so rodents don't get in, then you can do, you're still using a lot of shredded leaves. The leaves really have all the nutrition in them. We think that the vegetable matter has a lot of nutrition. It really doesn't have that much. So we can use the vegetables as kind of the nitrogen, and again, the leaves as the carbon. So what I do is I usually dump some vegetable matter in and then cover it with some shredded leaves. That'll keep the flies down in that, because you'll still get flies in that closed bin. So that'll keep the flies down. The vegetable scraps also have a lot of moisture, so you really won't, and it's a closed bin, so you're not going to have to water that as much as you would an open bin.
And moss would substitute for the leaves?
Would what substitute?
Peat moss.
Peat moss. Okay, peat moss. No. Peat moss, we try not to use peat moss. It's not a very sustainable, it takes a long time to make peat. So anything else, I mean, you could use, leaves are really pretty unique. They have a lot of good stuff. You don't have enough leaves?
We do.
You have a sycamore. You have plenty of leaves, yeah. But you'll see, if you shred those sycamore leaves, it'll really grind down. Yeah, use the sycamore leaves, peat moss. Peat moss, we try not to use peat moss. Yes, ma'am.
Is redwood leaves any good?
They're hard to shred. I don't have a redwood tree, so I don't know. I've got to think they'd be really hard to shred. But again,
There's a shredder you can put over your bin.
there is. You could try it. I've never done it, but you could try it. Yeah. Did I repeat that question? Are redwood leaves good for shredding? I'm not sure. Yes, sir. Yeah. It does tend to become, let's see, ash, does that make it? I can't remember. Too much can be bad. Okay, then that's probably fine. That's probably no problem at all. And I do put eggshells in. I'll put them in either bin. It's probably better in the closed bin. But for eggshells, I like to let them dry a little bit and then kind of crush them. And then they do really well. Was there another question? No, good. And then I don't think I'm talking about worm bins, but I do like worm bins also. I finally got a good system down with worm bins, and they do use vegetable matter, and they do create a very rich compost. So worm bins are also a really good thing to try. Yes? No, these are special. These are special worms. Yeah, they're the red wigglers. They're a little special. You want to keep them, and they don't survive well out in the open. Yes, sir. There you go. But they're not red wigglers. It's a different type of worm. So he said his closed bin is loaded with worms. You're doing all the right things then. Are you getting some good compost from it? Oh, yeah. Great, great. Yeah, so lots of vegetable waste. Good, good, excellent. Okay. All right. So improving soil biology, living compost, and what I'm talking about that is, compost, if you can get it from your own garden, I mean, it's just better. It hasn't been sterilized or anything. It's got all the good stuff in it, so that's really good. Keep the soil planted. Again, a small area for maybe some native bees to get into the ground would be fine, but the soil works with the plants. So if you keep the soil planted, they're going to be working together, and you're going to be enriching the soil and helping the plant. You can use cover crops. I wouldn't do that if you're planting natives. I would do that more for vegetable gardens. Keeping plant litter on top is great. So if you get leaves, just leave them if you can. Large leaves, you might need to shred them in order to keep them on top of the soil. If you have to, you can have the soil tested. It's not that expensive if you're worried about anything. But again, that's really more for vegetable gardens than a typical drought-tolerant garden. No tilling. No tilling. We don't need to till. Okay. We don't need to till. You can till once, and I tilled that one that had really lifeless soil. You can till once to really get some amendments into the soil, but you don't need to till every year. It actually, soil is supposed to have horizons or levels. Different creatures grow at different levels in the soil, and so when you're tilling, you're kind of mashing that all up. So you really don't need to till. You had a question. I know. It really wrecks the soil. I did it once in one area, and I couldn't believe the difference in the soil. It was not as good. You really don't need to do it. Is he tilling vegetable gardens or? Yeah, it's not good. No, leave it. He doesn't need to do it. He doesn't need to do it. If you're worried about it, does he do it because of weeds or? He likes to do it. Darn him. We got to get him a new hobby. We'll get him a new hobby. Yeah, that's the answer. All right. Yes?
Usually, how deep is the topsoil?
Like 6 inches. I mean, it can be really deep. I don't know, but in the prairies, before we turned those all, the topsoil was supposed to be huge. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if this is tilling, but whenever I plant new plants, I do a lot of annuals and things. And I dig around to loosen up the soil.
Yeah.
Mix in the compost. And
Do I have mine? I don't have mine.
Tons of roots. I don't know what the roots are from.
Uh-huh.
Tons and tons. And I try to throw those out. Is there a reason I shouldn't do that? I mean, they just seem like they're all matted up together.
It's probably coming from some adjacent. So her question was, she puts in annuals, and so she likes to kind of break up the soil, and she finds a lot of roots in the soil, and she usually ends up pulling those out. Is there some large shrubs nearby or a large tree nearby? It's from them.
Yeah.
It's from them. And you water that area a little bit more because you're planting annuals, and so their roots are going to go where the water is.
And I'm assuming the roots are just going to take up space that I want my new plants to go
Well, it's going to be, so she's asking, she assumes that those roots are going to take up space where she wants her new plants. It's also going to be competition for the roots of those new plants. If it's very fine roots and it's a small area under the tree, I wouldn't worry about it. You're not going to harm. We're really worried about the tree. Sorry to say, the tree is much more valuable than the annuals, so we're really more worried about the tree than the annuals, but it will be competition and it should be fine. Yes?
We have raised vegetable beds,
Mm-hmm.
and the soil, I think, is played out over time, and
Yeah.
been using chicken manure
Mm-hmm.
in the early spring, before a plant, a month before a plant.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Chicken manure tends to be pretty high in nitrogen. It's well composted, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, it has to be
It
well,
smells, but it's well composted,
what does it smell like?
like manure.
Okay,
That's too raw.
That's too raw. Good compost should smell like earth and humus and the woods and all of that. So I think that might be a little too hot. You could compost it yourself, but again, if you could do your own compost, it would be,
Not anymore, but we did.
okay. All right, so if you want to buy it, I may not use chicken manure, I may use like a mushroom compost instead.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and just look for something a little bit, yeah. There's a little bit of a test. Let me see if I can remember this test on compost. Take a cup of a planter full of the compost, plant a couple of pea seeds.
Okay.
See if they come up, see if they look fine, see if they look right. If they do, then your compost is probably just fine.
Well, I put the manure in several months before I'm going to
Okay,
plant.
okay.
It breaks down. Is that okay?
Yes, I think that's much better. I think that's much better, yeah. But I would be careful. And, you know, it's always good to do a soil test.
Yeah, I guess I could.
Yeah, just do a soil test and see where you're at. And then you can see what your soil really might need. But I do love just regular compost for vegetable beds, yes.
So, Sherri, how can you tell, when was the topsoil added, and when was the?
This is a little bit more than I can answer. Typically,
What was the question?
oh, sorry, the question was, how can we tell where the topsoil ends and the soil begins? I'm not a soil scientist, so I can't tell you that. That might be something you could Google and find out, but you can kind of say, if you just say 6 inches, why do you want to know?
No, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Is that, underneath is light in soil? So what does that mean? Does that mean that it doesn't have worms, it doesn't have bacteria?
Yes, so the topsoil is really where all the action is going on, and the subsoil is really, now again, I am not a soil scientist, do not, say Sherri said, look it up, please look it up. But the soil is more sterile there. And, I mean, there is some action because, again, tree roots are going down into there, shrubs are going down into there, but the topsoil is where all the action is. And trees, even though they do have some deep roots, they have a lot of feeder roots which are on the surface. Okay, let's see if, I think we're about ready to take a break. I just wanted to show you that garden that had the really lifeless soil, little rototilling, little compost. We were able to add a lot of biodiversity back into the soil. And again, one rototilling is really all it needed with some amendments. So, some really good soil health. If you were going to get one book, it would be this one, Teeming with Microbes, A Gardener's Guide to the Soil Food Web, really written in a very layperson's term. It'll blow your mind. It's just a really different look at gardening. So, but the other ones are good as well.